A perfectly timed mistake is never an accident in the corporate food chain. It is a carefully calculated trap. The clock ticks down mercilessly towards a critical deadline, while the predator sits perfectly still in the sterile light, waiting for the inevitable crash. An email arrives with a critical error attached, disguised perfectly beneath a thin veil of sheer incompetence, a masterpiece of feigned stupidity. The perfectionist stares at the shattered data, feeling the suffocating weight of an impending disaster crashing down. The heart rate spikes. A sudden gasp and a frantic apology ring out, echoing through the silent room with an absolutely flawless delivery, playing the helpless fool. Notice the subtle asymmetry of that harmless smile, as they watch the panic spread across the room like wildfire, completely devoid of real guilt. This failure is not a product of low intelligence, but rather an incredibly precise calculation designed to halt progress. Just bad enough to be unusable. If the error were too catastrophic, they would face termination. But this exact level of mediocrity ensures total corporate survival and shifts the burden entirely. The host is now trapped in a silent agony, forced to choose between missing the deadline or saving the day. The invisible strings tighten. For a mind wired for absolute excellence and order, leaving a broken project untouched is a fate worse than death. They must intervene. Exhausted hands reach out to fix the broken code, while the parasite subtly leans back into the comfortable shadows. The transfer of energy begins. They offer to help with meaningless and trivial tasks, ensuring their hands remain completely clean while looking utterly busy. A beautiful cinematic illusion. Every corrected line of data silently seals the contract, binding the perfectionist to a grueling cycle of endless unseen labor, willingly carrying the dead weight. A flicker of crimson light reflects in the coffee cup, exposing the predator quietly enjoying the spectacle of absolute exhaustion, sipping away the victim's life. The crisis is averted, but a new precedent is set, establishing a toxic blueprint that will drain the host completely. The parasitism has successfully begun. A hostage situation does not always require a weapon. Sometimes it only requires a standard of absolute excellence, trapping the victim perfectly. They deliver a product that is undeniably terrible, forcing the perfectionist to stare at the glaring inadequacies, a psychological torture device. To submit this garbage to the upper management would mean destroying their own carefully built professional reputation, a risk they cannot take. The parasite watches the internal struggle with amusement, knowing the host will eventually crack under their own pressure. The trap is set. A metaphorical cage constructed entirely out of pride, locking the victim inside a prison of their own making. An inescapable scenario. The manipulator offers a half-hearted attempt to fix it, knowing full well that their assistance will only cause more damage. Brilliant sabotage. Frustration boils over as the perfectionist snaps back, declaring that it is simply faster to do it themselves, exactly as planned. The moment those words leave the victim's mouth, the invisible shackles of the hostage situation snap firmly shut, sealing their fate. Notice how the parasite relinquishes control so smoothly, like a snake shedding a burdensome skin without any hesitation. A masterclass in avoidance. They are held captive by their own competence, a brilliant exploitation of a genuinely good and rigorous work ethic, turning strength into weakness. The victim aggressively deletes the parasite's ruined draft, unknowingly clearing the path for future exploitation and endless labor, digging their own grave. This is the essence of the quality hostage. The better you perform your duties, the more you are punished. A twisted corporate reality. While the host burns the midnight oil tonight, the parasite will be sleeping peacefully with absolutely zero regrets. Perfectly balanced inequity. Every keystroke to fix the meticulously planned error drains another drop of vital energy from the crumbling host, bleeding them dry. Your own high standards have become a weapon, wielded masterfully by a predator who has absolutely none at all. Welcome to the trap. Praise is the cheapest corporate currency available, used to purchase your remaining lifespan. A beautiful, deadly transaction. The parasite delivers a perfectly crafted compliment, striking the exact core of pride. Weaponized psychological flattery. A starved ego absorbs the sweet words, drinking the venom without any hesitation. A fatal corporate mistake. They crown the victim with absolute excellence, ensuring the heavy metal crushes them. A brilliant psychological tactic. The phrase that "you are the best" secretly translates to "you do everything," the ultimate verbal trap. Pride temporarily masks the overwhelming physical exhaustion, hiding the reality of the exploitation. An invisible, toxic high. With the target thoroughly softened and blinded, the manipulator slowly steps away again, securing their total freedom. What feels like an honorable, shiny medal is actually a heavily weighted collar, binding the victim completely. The perfectionist dives back into the abyss, fueled by hollow words of admiration, burning their own engine. The architect of this entire toxic dynamic observes the flawless execution of labor, enjoying the free ride. They trade empty syllables for actual labor, achieving the absolute maximum possible return. A parasitic masterpiece. The temporary high of validation quickly fades, leaving only the crushing dead weight. Reality begins to set. A warm smile hides the cold calculation, ensuring the victim never realizes anything, maintaining the perfect illusion. Words of affirmation become thick iron chains, locking the host to the desk, a self-imposed prison. You are not valued for your brilliance, you are targeted for your usefulness. A beautifully painted lie. They do not fight you directly, they simply outweight your patience. A war of pure attrition. The host attempts to explain the process, detailing the simplest of tasks carefully. But the parasite acts utterly confused. Every clear instruction is met with empty stares, forcing the host to repeat themselves constantly, draining their mental reserves. The parasite asks a barrage of meaningless questions, intentionally dragging the process into total chaos, breaking the host down. It is a deliberate theatrical performance, designed specifically to weaponize total incompetence, turning teaching into a living nightmare. The perfectionist's breathing becomes incredibly heavy. Realizing that training this person is useless, it takes triple the time. Slowly, the toxic realization sets in, that doing the task alone is easier than enduring this endless charade. The parasite feeds on this exact frustration, watching the victim willingly surrender their time, claiming the unwanted workload. A heavy sigh signals the ultimate defeat as the exhausted host pushes them aside, taking over the entire project. The manipulator stumbles back with a fake apology, acting as though they genuinely tried, hiding a satisfied grin. This is not a failure to learn. This is a successful refusal to work, masked as unfortunate stupidity. The victim absorbs a massive burden of labor, while the parasite gently slides into obscurity, escaping responsibility flawlessly. A mountain of paperwork slowly suffocates the host, their energy directly transferred to the predator, an invisible parasitic feeding. They have trained the host perfectly, proving that sheer incompetence is a superpower, forcing excellence into brutal submission. The battle of patience is finally lost, leaving the perfectionist completely buried in tasks. The trap tightens securely. Notice how the profound confusion suddenly vanishes entirely. The exact moment a personal reward finally appears on the horizon. A miraculous recovery. The supposedly broken brain suddenly begins functioning at absolute maximum capacity, calculating precise financial bonuses down to the very last decimal. Pure selective genius. Watch the physical transformation as the slumping shoulders instantly straighten up, replacing the helpless victim act with an incredibly sharp corporate predator, shifting gears seamlessly. When a tedious task is assigned, they suffer from severe temporary amnesia, forgetting basic software operations they have used for over 5 years. A convenient memory loss. Yet when the upper management calls for a high-profile presentation, they immediately recall every single minute detail to claim the ultimate credit. stealing the spotlight perfectly. The perfectionist watches in silent, absolute horror from the dark background, as the parasite articulates complex strategies they supposedly could not even comprehend. A sickening realization. Selective competence is the ultimate proof of premeditated psychological office warfare, demonstrating that their inability to work is an entirely active choice. Weaponized laziness confirmed. They navigate office politics with the lethal precision of a guided missile, while pretending they cannot figure out how to operate the coffee machine. A masterful deception. A vivid crimson chart tracks their sudden spike in absolute productivity, aligning perfectly with the exact moment the annual performance bonuses are officially announced. The numbers never lie. The host is left holding the heavy black bag of meaningless labor, while the parasite dances flawlessly through the bright white corridors of praise. An unjust distribution. Notice how quickly they can organize a complex corporate holiday party, yet they completely fail to format a basic spreadsheet for the quarterly report. The priorities are crystal clear. This specific behavioral pattern isolates the victim in a very unique way, because nobody else sees the sheer incompetence hidden behind the closed doors. A perfect covert operation. If the victim tries to expose the parasite to the upper management, they are met with absolute disbelief because the parasite acts incredibly capable, the perfect defensive shield. The manipulator ensures they are only incompetent in front of the host, creating an isolated, toxic dynamic where the host sounds completely crazy complaining. Psychological gaslighting achieved. The host realizes they are fighting a ghost who is selectively solid, a predator who only shows their true fangs when the victim is alone. The ultimate psychological checkmate. A skilled parasite knows exactly how much blood it can safely drain before the exhausted host completely collapses and dies. A delicate biological balance. They meticulously calculate the absolute bare minimum required to maintain their employment, ensuring they are never officially fired for incompetence. Mastering the baseline. The boundary of acceptable laziness is pushed precisely to the breaking point, forcing the victim to absorb the overflow effortlessly. A calculated pressure test. Watch them inch closer to the dangerous edge of total project failure, stopping just seconds before the damage becomes irreversible. A thrilling covert game. The host instinctively jumps in to prevent the looming catastrophic corporate disaster, acting exactly as the predator confidently predicted earlier. Perfectly conditioned behavior. This careful measurement proves the manipulator is entirely aware of their surroundings, actively managing the flow of responsibility away constantly. A parasitic genius. An invisible umbilical cord connects the lazy predator to the brilliant worker, siphoning hours of life without leaving a trace. The perfect crime. Look at the dark circles deepening under the eyes of the perfectionist, while the predator maintains a glowing, healthy complexion. A stark physical contrast. They contribute a fraction of a percent to the massive shared assignment, while carefully adopting the posture of a leader, staging the grand illusion. When the project succeeds, they are the first to claim a victory, loudly celebrating a triumph built entirely by others, stealing the golden crown. The victim is simply too drained to fight for their own recognition, choosing silent resentment over another exhausting public conflict, surrendering the battlefield entirely. A subtle crimson smirk reveals the absolute satisfaction of the true architect, watching the flawless execution of their parasitic strategy, claiming the ultimate prize. They have constructed a perfectly unbalanced ecosystem that favors only their survival, ensuring the heavy lifting is always outsourced efficiently. A brilliant, toxic system. Every single day is a repetition of this carefully designed psychological torture, trapping the host in an endless, grinding loop, slowly crushing their spirit. They have perfected the dark art of modern corporate survival and advancement by feeding exclusively on your relentless work ethic. An invisible office vampire. Refuse to carry their heavy burden, and suddenly the victim is completely transformed into the villain of the office. A stunning narrative flip. The manipulator immediately drops their head down, projecting an image of absolute despair and total corporate helplessness. Weaponized psychological sadness. They weaponize tears and soft, trembling apologies, ensuring every single coworker witnesses their carefully orchestrated public suffering, building a sympathetic audience. A whisper campaign begins circulating the dark office, painting the competent perfectionist as a cold and ruthless tyrant. Character assassination begins. The parasite effectively hijacks the moral high ground, hiding their deep, malicious laziness behind a beautifully fragile mask. Defensive victimhood activated. Every attempt to establish healthy professional boundaries is instantly met with a perfectly timed display of sheer emotional devastation. An invisible wall. The perfectionist feels the crushing weight of judgment, staring at the accusing glares of colleagues who understand absolutely nothing, isolated by rumors. Guilt becomes a heavy iron collar around their neck, slowly dragging the exhausted victim back to the grinding desk. A psychological leash. The host is not permitted to just say no, because saying no makes them the ultimate aggressor in this twisted play. Checkmate by pity. The manipulator expertly turns the entire social ecosystem into a massive defensive shield to protect their supreme laziness. Environmental manipulation. The victim finally surrenders to the crushing social pressure, stepping forward to fix the disaster just to stop the echoing whispering. The trap closes. Watch the fake tears instantly evaporate into thin air. The very moment the victim officially accepts the massive, unwanted responsibility. A miraculous emotional recovery. A flash of crimson victory shines in their eyes, hidden perfectly beneath the wiped tears of a fake emotional breakdown. Pure, cold calculation. The host is forced to constantly apologize for enforcing boundaries, existing in an inverted reality where the parasite dictates the moral rules. Psychological submission. Empathy is the most dangerous liability in this toxic environment, exploited ruthlessly to keep the parasitic cycle turning without any real friction. The perfect prison. Watch the physical deterioration accelerate rapidly under the immense pressure, as the host slowly withers beneath someone else's heavy shadow. A tragic collapse. The relentless grinding of continuous overtime destroys their physical health, leaving behind an empty shell completely devoid of any remaining passion. The spark dies. Meanwhile, the architect of this misery rests with perfect peace, completely untroubled by the immense suffering they intentionally engineered for survival. Undisturbed slumber. Caffeine becomes the only remaining fuel for the dying engine, pumping toxic artificial energy into a thoroughly broken and exhausted system, running on fumes. A heavy, invisible parasite permanently attaches itself to their spine, ensuring every single movement requires twice the normal physical effort. A crushing weight. The entire corporate environment slowly shrinks into a suffocating box, isolating the perfectionist from any possible hope of a clean rescue. Solitary confinement. Observe the glowing, healthy complexion of the perfectly rested manipulator, standing in stark contrast to the hollowed cheeks of their victim. A vampiric feeding. Eventually, the profound exhaustion forces the perfectionist to make mistakes, compromising the very high standards they sacrifice their health to protect. The ultimate irony. The predator seizes this rare moment of weakness with joy, pointing out the tiny error to establish complete psychological dominance immediately, reversing the roles. A shattered mirror reflects a completely broken and fragmented identity, unable to recognize the fiercely competent professional they once proudly were. A lost soul. The crimson calendar bleeds days into an endless, terrifying blur, marching aggressively toward a final deadline that promises absolutely zero relief, infinite punishment. They begin drafting the final success email well in advance, preparing to harvest the golden fruit planted in the victim's blood. A stolen harvest. A blinding white monitor becomes the only window to reality, trapping the exhausted mind inside a chaotic labyrinth of meaningless numbers. Digital imprisonment. The clock strikes the exact hour and the manipulator leaves, walking out into the bright light while the victim remains chained, perfectly legal torture. The total consumption of the host is now nearly complete, leaving only a hollow vessel functioning entirely on pure, desperate anxiety. The end approaches. A crime has been committed in broad daylight, leaving absolutely zero physical evidence behind for the investigators. A flawless, invisible execution. The manipulator keeps their hands entirely spotless, while someone else drowns deeply in their abandoned corporate responsibilities. A brilliant, silent murder. Upper management reviews the quarterly performance metrics, seeing only a highly productive and wonderfully cooperative team player. A perfectly crafted illusion. The perfectionist is buried so deep in the heavy workload that they become completely invisible to the higher corporate authorities, lost in the dark shadows. When the annual corporate performance reviews arrive, the parasite receives glowing commendations for their supposed brilliant strategic oversight, stealing all the credit. The exhausted victim receives only standard generic feedback, advising them to manage their personal stress levels much more effectively. An insulting final blow. The true brilliance of this emotional exploitation is that the victim actively participated in building their own psychological prison, locking the door themselves. Complaining now would only make the exhausted host look incredibly bitter and dangerously unstable to the upper management team, silencing them completely. The predator smiles warmly in the corporate photos, hiding their true parasitic nature behind a perfectly polished, innocent facade. The mask remains intact. They have successfully weaponized the victim's strong work ethic and completely stolen the resulting rewards without expending any real physical effort. The ultimate heist. The bustling office ecosystem continues functioning smoothly, remaining completely unaware of the silent parasitic feeding happening in the dark corners, blind to the abuse. The perfectionist realizes the terrifying cold truth at last, that absolute competence is frequently punished with endless additional unrewarded heavy labor, a twisted reward system. This dynamic is not an unfortunate office accident, but rather a perfectly executed psychological strategy designed for absolute corporate survival. A deliberate parasitic design. The manipulator packs their neat bag right on time, leaving the chaotic, messy disaster entirely for the completely broken working host, escaping without any consequences. A perfect modern corporate crime requires absolutely no violence, simply a masterclass in psychological manipulation and relentlessly draining the victim's patience. The masterpiece is complete. The bitter reality of this psychological dynamic reveals that pure kindness is actively punished. An unfair ecosystem. Every single time the victim fixes a mistake, they are unknowingly training the ultimate predator, sealing their fate. The manipulator does not feel any genuine gratitude. They only calculate the increasing profit margin. A cold machine. In a profoundly toxic corporate environment like this, exceptional competence guarantees a brutal lifelong sentence. Endless unpaid labor. Feigned ignorance acts as an impenetrable defensive shield, deflecting all accountability onto the nearest target. Weaponized incompetence succeeds. The perfectionist believes they are saving the company, while actively enabling their own slow destruction. A fatal illusion. To survive this incredibly sophisticated manipulation tactic today, the host must learn to embrace failure. Dropping the ball, letting the parasite completely fail on their own, is the only way to expose them, breaking the cycle. A boundary is completely useless without strict enforcement, requiring the victim to watch things burn, establishing real limits. The moment the free labor supply completely stops, the parasite will frantically search for survival, hunting elsewhere quickly. They will attempt to inflict heavy psychological guilt, projecting their own absolute failure onto others, defending the illusion. True freedom requires stepping out of the shadows, refusing to carry another adult's intentional burdens, escaping the trap. The corporate food chain heavily relies on exploitation, demanding that the strongest carry the weakest, a broken design. The manipulator will simply move to another desk, seeking a fresh victim to slowly drain. The cycle continues. Recognizing the calculated incompetence is the first step to finally reclaiming a stolen professional life. The game ends.